A desperate 911 call in the dead of night. A man frantically claiming that he's being chased. Then silence. Brandon Lawson vanished on a Texas highway in 2013, leaving behind more questions than answers. What truly happened that night? Was he lost, running from something or someone? Or was it all a tragic accident? This story explores the disappearance of Brandon Lawson, a case that has haunted investigators for over a decade. Stay tuned to uncover the latest developments and theories surrounding this baffling case. Brandon Lawson was born and raised in the tight-knit community of San Angelo, Texas. A town known for its strong family values and hard-working residents, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Brandon was no exception. At just 26 years old, he was already a father of 4 young children. To his family, he was more than just a provider, he was their rock, the one who always made them laugh, the man they could depend on. But like many young fathers struggling to balance family life with the pressures of a demanding job, Brandon had his share of struggles. Brandon worked in the oil fields, tough, grueling work that demanded long hours and often took him far away from home. It was the kind of job that paid well but came with a heavy cost. Those who knew him described Brandon as a man trying to piece together a life that had been far from perfect. He had a checkered past, tangled with the kind of mistakes that many young men in small towns find hard to escape. But in recent years, it seemed like Brandon was turning a corner. He was committed to being a better father, a better partner, and above all, a better man. He shared a home with his longtime girlfriend, Ladessa Lofton. They had weathered many storms together, raising their children through thick and thin. But no relationship is without its moments of tension, especially one that had endured as many ups and downs as theirs. On the evening of August 8, 2013, it all came to a boiling point. That night, what started as a simple disagreement between Brandon and Ladessa quickly escalated. The details of their argument remain unclear, but whatever was said, it was enough for Brandon to decide he needed to leave, needed to put some distance between himself and the heat of the moment. His mind was made up. He would drive to his father's house in Crowley, Texas, over 3 hours away. It wasn't unusual for Brandon to take off to clear his head. His family knew he needed his space sometimes, especially when life got overwhelming. But as he walked out the door, Ladessa couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had seen Brandon angry before, but this time felt different. She called after him, begging him to come back inside to think things through, but he wouldn't listen. As the screen door slammed behind him, it was the last time she would ever see him. With nothing but the clothes on his back, Brandon jumped into his silver Ford F-150 and sped away. The tires screeched on the gravel driveway as he pulled onto the highway, the sound of his truck fading into the night. Ladessa tried to call him, her hands trembling as she dialed his number over and over, hoping he would pick up, hoping he would turn around. But the calls went unanswered. As Brandon drove down that desolate stretch of Highway 277, he was completely alone. No streetlights, no other cars, just miles of open fields on either side. Was he lost in thought, replaying the argument with Ladessa in his mind? Or was there something else that was weighing on him, something he couldn't shake? Whatever it was, he kept driving, pushing further into the darkness. This would be the last time anyone would ever see Brandon Lawson alive. What happened next would spark one of the most perplexing missing person cases in Texas history. As Brandon sped away into the night, the anger from his argument with Ladessa still simmered. His truck was the only companion he had on that desolate road, with nothing but the sound of gravel crunching beneath his tires and the occasional flash of wildlife crossing his path. The Texas night was pitch black, with no streetlights for miles, only the faint glow of the moon casting eerie shadows across the fields that stretched endlessly on either side. It was nearly midnight by the time Brandon reached a remote stretch of Highway 277, close to Bronte, Texas, a town so small, most people pass through it without even realizing. The highway cut through empty pastures and thick brush, with the occasional barbed wire fence marking the boundaries of ranchland. The air was stiflingly hot, the kind of heat that clings to your skin, even in the dead of night. The only sounds were the hum of his truck engine and the faint rustle of wind through the dry grass. Around 11:53 p.m., Brandon's phone rang with an incoming call from Ledessa. She was still worried, still pleading with him to come back. She wanted him to come home, to put this argument behind them. But Brandon was stubborn, his mind made up. He assured her he would be fine. They exchanged a few tense words before he hung up, but that would not be the last time his phone would ring that night. Nearly an hour after leaving home, around 12:38 a.m., Brandon's truck came to a sudden stop. He had run out of gas in the middle of nowhere. The highway was deserted, the kind of place where you could drive for miles without seeing another soul. Brandon knew he was in trouble. He was stranded, alone, on a dark, lonely road, with no gas and no way to move forward. In that moment of desperation, he did what most of us would do. He called for help. His brother Kyle was the first person who came to mind. Kyle was the kind of brother you could always count on, the kind who would drop everything to help. Brandon's voice was urgent yet calm as he explained his situation. He was out of gas, stuck on Highway 277, and he needed Kyle to come as soon as possible. Kyle, half asleep, answered the call. He immediately agreed to bring a gas can and set out to help his brother. But something in Brandon's voice seemed off. Kyle couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was an edge to Brandon's tone, an urgency that suggested more than just an empty gas tank. Was Brandon hiding something? Was there something more going on that he wasn't saying? Lip. As Kyle and his girlfriend set off on the dark highway to find Brandon, the drive seemed to stretch on forever. The road was dark and empty, with only their headlights piercing through the thick blanket of night. The tension in the car was palpable. Kyle kept checking his phone, hoping for another call or text from Brandon, some sign that he was okay. But the phone stayed silent. But before Kyle could reach his brother, something unexpected happened, something that would change everything. At 12:50 a.m., just minutes after calling Kyle, Brandon dialed 911. The dispatcher who answered was met with a frantic, breathless voice. Brandon was speaking quickly, his words broken by static, making it hard to understand. He was clearly terrified, and whatever was chasing him, he believed he was in real danger.
911 emergency.
Yes, I'm in the middle of the field. It's like we're just pushing guys over. Right here going towards Javelin on both sides. Not sure if they're out of gas. There's one car here. Got taken to the woods. Quick words.
Okay, now run that by me.
We're not talking to him. I actually ran into him.
Ah, you ran into him. Okay.
Got the first guy.
Do you need an ambulance?
No, I need to call.
Okay. Is anybody hurt? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Those who have listened to the call describe it as one of the most chilling moments they've ever heard. It was clear Brandon was in a state of panic, but the details he provided were jumbled, disjointed. Was he being chased by someone? Was there a car accident? Or was he simply lost, confused, and frightened in the dark Texas wilderness? After that call, Brandon's phone went silent. The dispatcher tried to call back, but there was no answer. Kyle, unaware of the 911 call, continued to drive toward the location Brandon had described. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity as the tension mounted. What was waiting for them on that dark stretch of highway? When Kyle finally arrived, he found Brandon's truck abandoned on the side of the road. The doors were unlocked and the keys were gone, but there was no sign of Brandon anywhere. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. In the quiet, oppressive darkness, the only sound was the wind howling through the trees, a ghostly reminder of the desperate 911 call that no one fully understood. With no sign of Brandon, Kyle frantically called out his brother's name, searching the nearby fields and ditches. The police arrived shortly after, responding to a report of a stranded vehicle. But even with searchlights and flashlights cutting through the night, they found nothing. No tracks, no signs of a struggle, nothing to indicate where Brandon had gone or what might have happened to him. What could have driven Brandon to make that frantic 911 call? Was it paranoia, fear, or was there truly someone or something chasing him that night? The questions would only multiply as the search for Brandon Lawson began, turning this quiet Texas highway into the center of one of the most perplexing disappearances in recent memory. For hours, they searched. Helicopters circled overhead, volunteers walked the fields, and bloodhounds were brought in to pick up a scent. But as the hours turned into days, the hope of finding Brandon alive began to fade. The questions, however, only grew. What was Brandon running from? Why did he disappear so suddenly? And most importantly, what did he see or think he saw that terrified him enough to make that desperate call for help? As dawn broke over the Texas plains, the search continued, but the trail was growing colder with every passing moment. The only clues left behind were Brandon's truck and that cryptic 911 call, a call that would haunt everyone involved for years to come. The scene that greeted Kyle and the sheriff's deputies that night was eerie and inexplicable. Brandon's truck sat alone on the side of Highway 277, its hazard lights blinking steadily in the darkness, like a silent beacon calling for help. The truck doors were unlocked, the keys were gone, and there was no sign of Brandon anywhere. It was as if he had stepped out of the vehicle and simply vanished into the vast, empty night. The deputies carefully examined the scene, their flashlights sweeping across the dry, cracked asphalt and the tall, swaying grass that lined the highway. They called out into the darkness, their voices echoing into the void, but all they were met with was the sound of the wind and the distant rustle of the fields. There were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, nothing to suggest where Brandon might have gone or what could have happened to him in those few, crucial minutes after his last call. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, more deputies and volunteers arrived. The search had officially begun. Helicopters hovered overhead, their searchlights cutting through the early morning mist. Men on horseback traversed the rugged terrain, while search dogs, noses to the ground, tried to pick up any trace of Brandon's scent. Every so often, a call would ring out, Brandon. Brandon. But there was no response. The fields seemed to swallow their voices whole. The area surrounding Highway 277 was treacherous. A maze of thick brush, deep bimes and barbed wire fences that could easily trip up anyone trying to navigate it in the dark. The search teams were relentless, covering every square inch of the area. For days, they combed through dense underbrush, waded through shallow streams, and peered into every crevice and gully. But there was nothing, no footprints, no discarded belongings, not a single clue as to where Brandon might have gone. As days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. The Lawson family, desperate for answers, took matters into their own hands. They organized volunteer search parties, distributed flyers, and pleaded with the public for any information. Ladessa, Brandon's girlfriend, was relentless. She called radio stations, local news outlets, and anyone who would listen. But the leads that came in were vague at best, and each one turned into a dead end. The small town of San Angelo was abuzz with rumors. Some locals speculated that Brandon had simply walked away from his life, overwhelmed by the pressures of work and family. Others whispered about foul play. Perhaps he had stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to see, something that got him killed. The area was known for its share of criminal activity, particularly drug trafficking. Could Brandon have accidentally crossed paths with dangerous individuals that night? But not everyone was convinced that Brandon had met with foul play. Some believed the answer lay in the 911 call itself. Experts and internet sleuths began dissecting every second of the audio, trying to decipher Brandon's frantic words. "I ran into something. There's one guy chasing me to the woods." What did he mean? Was he hallucinating? Was it a drug-induced episode? Brandon had struggled with substance use in the past, and some theorized that he might have taken something that night, causing him to become paranoid and disoriented. But even if he was under the influence, it didn't explain why he would vanish without a fey trace. And then there were those who believed Brandon was genuinely in danger. that he was being pursued by someone or something. Some suggested it could have been an unknown assailant, perhaps a driver who picked him up and then turned violent. Others speculated that he might have been mistaken for someone else in a case of mistaken identity. As the months dragged on, the case went cold. The official investigation slowed to a crawl, and the search parties dwindled. But Brandon's family never gave up. They hired private investigators, combed through records, and conducted their own searches. Every few months, another tip would come in, someone claiming to have seen Brandon at a truck stop or walking along a remote highway. Each time, the family would follow up, chasing the slimmest of leads. But each time, they were met with disappointment. Nearly a year after Brandon disappeared, the Texas Department of Public Safety declared that they had exhausted all leads. For the authorities, it was just another case of a missing person. But for Brandon's family, it was a wound that would never heal, a question that would never be answered. The theories have never stopped. Some still believe Brandon met with foul play, perhaps falling victim to a crime of opportunity on that dark, lonely stretch of highway. Others maintain that it was a tragic accident, that he became disoriented, wandered into the wilderness, and succumbed to the elements. But the most haunting theory of all is that somewhere, out in the vast Texas plains, Brandon is still waiting to be found. Despite the lack of evidence, despite the years that have passed, his family continues to search. They refuse to believe that someone can just disappear, vanish without a trace in a world so connected, so mapped out. They hold on to hope, even as the rest of the world moves on. For nearly a decade, the disappearance of Brandon Lawson remained an unsolved enigma, a haunting question mark on the Texas plains. His family, driven by an unshakable hope, refused to let the case grow cold. Year after year, they clung to the belief that one day they would find the answers they so desperately sought. While the world moved on, Brandon's loved ones never stopped searching, never stopped pushing for the truth. It was a decade of candlelight vigils, sleepless nights, and prayers whispered into the darkness. And then, almost 10 years after that fateful night, a glimmer of hope finally emerged. In early 2022, a group of dedicated volunteers, led by independent search specialists, decided to re-area near the Colorado River, an area that had been scoured many times before. But this time they came equipped with more than just flashlights and sheer determination. Armed with advanced technology, including ground-penetrating radar and the keen noses of trained cadaver dogs, they were prepared to uncover what had been hidden for so long. For days, the search team combed the area, retracing their steps over ground that had been searched countless times before. The summer heat was relentless, the thick brush unforgiving. But this team was determined to leave no stone unturned. As the cadaver dogs sniffed through the underbrush, their handlers kept a watchful eye, hoping for a signal, a pause, a bark, anything that might indicate they were close. And then, on a hot afternoon in August 2022, the dogs alerted their handlers to something beneath the soil. The team immediately began to dig, their hands shaking with anticipation and dread. They unearthed what appeared to be human bones, partially hidden beneath layers of dirt and debris. The discovery was met with a mix of relief and sorrow, a breakthrough that came far too late to bring Brandon home alive, but perhaps just in time to finally answer the questions that had tormented his family for so long. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small community of San Angelo, where Brandon's case had become something of a local legend. For those who had spent years speculating about what had happened to him, this was a moment of bittersweet closure. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting headlines that read, "Human remains found in connection to Brandon Lawson case." But even with this breakthrough, the questions only deepened. In February 2023, after months of forensic analysis, the Texas Department of Public Safety confirmed the worst. The remains were indeed those of Brandon Lawson. DNA testing, dental records, and forensic examinations left no doubt. Brandon had been found, but his family's relief was tempered by an overwhelming sense of loss. This was not the reunion they had prayed for. The confirmation of Brandon's identity brought some closure, but it also opened the door to even more troubling questions. The remains were found in a heavily wooded area near the Colorado River, not far from where his truck had run out of gas that fateful night. But how had he ended up there? The area had been searched numerous times over the years. Could it have been missed in earlier searches, or had someone placed the remains there later? Forensic experts struggled to determine the cause of death. The bones were too deteriorated to provide a clear answer. There were no obvious signs of trauma, no bullet holes or fractures that would suggest foul play. But that didn't mean foul play could be ruled out. The fact that Brandon's remains had been found in such a secluded area raised the possibility that someone might have wanted him to stay hidden. The lack of clear answers led to a resurgence of theories among the public and true crime enthusiasts. Some believed that Brandon had simply gotten lost in the dense brush and succumbed to the elements. The Texas wilderness can be brutal, especially in the summer months when temperatures can soar to dangerous levels. But others remained convinced that foul play was involved. Why would a man who was clearly terrified, as heard on that 911 call, simply wander off into the night? Some speculated that Brandon may have encountered someone on that desolate highway who had ill intentions. Could it have been a case of mistaken identity? Or perhaps he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, stumbling upon something he shouldn't have seen. The area was known for its drug trafficking routes, and locals whispered about the dangers lurking in the shadows. But for Ledessa and the rest of Brandon's family, the theories offered little comfort. They wanted answers, not speculation. Why had Brandon's last moments been filled with such fear? What had he seen or heard that drove him to call 911, pleading for help? As they laid Brandon to rest, the questions hung heavy in the air, unanswered. In March 2023, the family held a small, private funeral for Brandon. Friends and family gathered to say their goodbyes, laying flowers on his grave as they whispered prayers for peace. But even as they said their final farewells, one thought lingered in the minds of everyone who had been touched by Brandon's story. What truly happened to him on that dark stretch of Texas highway? As the sun sets on this tragic story, the questions remain. The truth of what happened to Brandon Lawson may be lost forever, buried in the fields and shadows of the Texas plains. But his family continues to hold out hope that someday, someone will come forward with the piece of the puzzle that will finally bring them peace. If you or anyone you know has any information about Brandon Lawson's disappearance, please contact the Texas Department of Public Safety. Your call could be the one that finally brings closure to this heart-wrenching mystery. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Together, we might just find the answers. Until next time, remember to stay safe, stay curious, and keep searching for the truth. We'll see you in the next story, and thanks for watching.